Contempt seldom announces itself with a raised hand. It prefers to arrive wrapped as a favor, a small courtesy arranged so that whoever accepts it will look a fool for having hoped. When the sister of the Duke of Aldermere sent the penniless flower painter north to his shuttered house on the moor, the whole affair was meant to be the amusement of the season. The girl would lay her modest little watercolors before a man famous for despising every soft and pretty thing, and he would turn her out into the cold, and the tale would warm every drawing room from there to London. Instead, the Duke lifted one small painting from her shaking hands, carried it to the tall window, and held it up to the last gray light of the failing day. The carrier's cart smelled of wet sacking, and it carried Linnet Farrow the last long miles into a country that grew poorer of light with every turn of the wheel. She sat with her portfolio pressed to her chest, and in the pocket over her heart she kept two things: a letter and every coin she had left in the world, which she could have closed inside one fist with room to spare. She was 24, and her fingers were marked faintly at the tips with colors that would not wash away. Her father had been a drawing master, better than good, and he had died of a fever in a cold room while the fine gentleman who praised his work stayed home. Paint what is true, he had told her near the end, and let the fashionable ones paint what is only pretty. It was the whole of her inheritance, and she had lived on it since, taking what work she could, invisible in the houses of the merely rich. The letter had come 3 weeks earlier, in the hand of a secretary to the Lady Sibylla Vane. It engaged Miss Farrow to travel to Cranmore Hall in Northumberland and paint a series of flower studies for the household, and to attend upon the Duke of Aldermere. The fee was £20, a year of careful living, and Linnet had read it 4 times before she saw the snare inside the courtesy. She knew the Lady Sibylla by reputation, beautiful and witty and cruel in the way of people who have never once been cold. She knew the Duke, too, or his legend, a man come back from the war with a ruined body and a ruined temper, who had shut his doors and turned away far better callers than a painter. He had never begged his sister for pictures of roses. The letter was a joke then. The little dauber would be sent all this cold way so that the terrible Duke might crush her before witnesses, and the story of the nobody sent packing would be told behind fans until it was worn smooth, and it would finish her. She had understood all of it, and packed her portfolio and come, because the alternative to £20 was a ditch, and pride was a luxury she could not afford. The cart came over the last rise, and Cranmore Hall stood up out of the dusk, a long gray pile among black yews, half its windows shuttered from within, so that the house wore a blind and sleeping look, as though it had closed its own eyes years ago and forgotten how to open them. No smoke rose from the greater chimneys. It looked, she thought, exactly like a place where a man had gone to be alone, with a grief he could not put down. She paid the carrier the last of her fortune, felt each coin go like a drawn tooth, and walked up the long, dark drive alone. The knocker was an iron bird, worn faceless by the rain. She let it fall once and did not knock again, for a second knock makes a supplicant of you, and she would not be a supplicant on this doorstep. At last, a bolt ground back, and the door opened on an old man with a candle, tall and spare in a black gone green at the seams, his long gray face worn with the particular tiredness of a servant who has kept a house alive through a season of mourning. He looked at the portfolio, the marked fingers, the mended cuff, and did the sums, and arrived at a total he had plainly reached before. "I am expected," she said, and was glad her voice did not shake. Farrow, engaged to paint for the household by the Lady Sibylla. Something moved behind his eyes at the name and was folded quickly away, and Linnet, who had spent her life reading the faces of people with power over her, saw it. Whatever the Lady Sibylla was in this house, She was not loved. His grace receives no one, the old man said. I have not come to be received. I have come to work, and a house this size can surely find room for the difference. I have traveled since before light, and paid away nearly all I own to reach your door. Turn me out now, and you turn me onto a dark moor, with no cart and no candle, and I will still be on your step come morning, a good deal colder and far more inconvenient. A frozen painter on the threshold is more trouble to his grace than a living one in a back room. At the corner of his tired mouth, something that was almost the memory of a smile came and went. Wait here, he said, and led her into a cold hall where the pictures hung rank on rank under dust sheets, every frame veiled like a face at a funeral. When he came back, he lifted his candle toward a dark corridor. His grace will see you, he said, and sounded amazed to be saying it. This way, Miss Farrow, and do not, whatever else you do, remark upon his hand. She followed the candle down a passage where cold air breathed under the closed doors, to a pair of doors with a thin line of firelight beneath, the first warmth since the moor. The old man knocked and opened one. The person from the Lady Sibylla, your grace, he said. It is the painter. It is a lady. A voice came out of the room, low and dark and roughened at its edges. Then my sister has finally found a way to make me laugh, it said. Send it in, Osgood, and see the fire made up. She may as well be warm while I disappoint her. Lynette lifted her chin and went in. It was a study, its walls climbing with books, a great fire losing to the stony chill, and in a chair set at an angle to it sat the Duke of Aldermere. He did not rise. She had not expected him to. He was younger than the legend, and harder, his dark hair shoved back by an impatient hand, his face all straight lines and shadow, handsome and spoiled, or perhaps completed by a pale scar down one cheekbone. His eyes, when they found her, were a gray so light they were nearly silver, and the coldest and weariest she had ever been looked at by. His right hand rested along the chair arm inside a close black glove, quite still, the last two fingers curled in a way that would not easily be made straight. Do not remark upon his hand. She did not. So, he said, not troubling to raise a voice that needed no raising. My sister has scoured the kingdom and found me a drawing mistress, come to teach me the tasteful arrangement of a bowl of fruit. He looked her over, the cuff, the boots, and found nothing warm to say of any of it. What did she promise you? 20 pounds, enough to make the journey worth the humiliation. And what did she promise would happen when you came? Nothing. That is the joke. You were sent all this way to be sent all the way back, with the road home for your wages. You knew it. It is in your face that you knew it. And here you stand, dripping on my floor. Tell me why. Because 20 pounds is 20 pounds, your grace. And I have never once been able to eat my pride, though I have gone hungry enough to try. He looked at her, the way a man looks at a card fallen the wrong way up. Show me then. Show me what my sister thinks is worth a woman's dignity. She unlaced the portfolio with fingers stiff from cold, and made them slow, so the stiffness read as care. She did not give him the showy things. She gave him the truest thing she had, a small study of a common dog rose, 5 pale petals, and one hip reddening at the tip, and at the edge of one petal, a bruise of brown where it had begun, even as she painted it, to die. She had not hidden the dying. She had painted that too. She held it out to him and did not apologize for it. He took it in his left hand and looked, and his face did not change. And then he rose. It cost him something. She saw the careful way he took his weight, and the breath let slowly out, the effort of a man long sunk in a chair and long ago at a war. But he rose, the Duke who did not rise for dukes, and carried the small painting across to the window and turned it to the last of the dying light, so that the glow came through the paper and the thin skin of the petals, and he studied it as though it were a doorway into a country he had not been let into in years. "Who taught you to leave the brown in?" he said, without turning. Her heart turned hard against her ribs. It was not the question of a man who saw flowers. It was the question of a man who saw. "My father," she said. "He told me a flower painted without its dying is only a flower for someone who has never loved one." Out on the moor, the last light went. "Sit down, Miss Farrow," he said. She did not sit at once. It had been so long since anyone offered her a chair, without wanting something ugly in return, that the words did not fit the room, and she stood turning them over, suspicious of them. The Duke set her painting on the sill, with a care she noted, and lowered himself back into his chair and nodded at the one across from it. "In this house, a person of your situation expects to be kept standing until her legs ache, and then sent to eat with the boot boy," he said. "That is how my sister would have it. I have not the smallest interest in how my sister would have anything. Sit before you fall down. You are the color of a drowned candle." She sat, and the heat came at her all at once, and she set her jaw against the shutter. He watched and offered no pity, and she was grateful, for she had never met a pity that did not have a price folded inside it. "You know what I am," he said. "The mad recluse of the moor, the man who came back from Spain with half a hand and no manners. And knowing it, you brought me a dying flower and your father's philosophy of art. Either you are the boldest woman my sister ever underestimated, or too tired to be frightened." "Which is it?" "Both," she said. "Very often it is both, Your Grace." That drew from him a short, rough sound, low in the chest, that she realized had been a laugh, one that surprised its owner and hurt him on the way out, like a limb long unused. She let her eyes move once about the room and understood several things at once. The way she understood a flower, all its parts resolving into a single living shape. The veiled pictures in the hall, the one uncovered painting above the mantel, a small dark oil of a woman with the Duke's pale eyes and a mouth made for laughing. The way his gaze had gone to the dog rose as though it had cut him. "You had a painter here before me," she said, before she had decided whether it was wise. "A real one. Not for hire. Someone this house loved." He went very still. "Have a care, Miss Farrow," he said quietly. "I mean no impertinence, and I will say no more if you forbid me. But the whole house is in mourning for pictures, every frame veiled but one, and a person does not cover what she never valued." She looked at the laughing mouth above the fire. It was a kindness she paid you, whoever she was, to leave that one uncovered, so you would not forget she had a face. For a moment she thought he would call the old man and have her put out into the dark. Instead, he said, in a voice stripped almost to nothing, "My mother." And then, gathering himself, she painted. Not for money. There was never any question of money. Every flower in the glass house my grandfather built, and a great many that had to be sent for, and she was better than any woman in England had a right to be, and she died before she finished. His jaw worked. "I had them all covered. I could not walk past them." "I understand," Lynette said, and she did. "You understand nothing," he said. But there was no heat in it, only exhaustion, and both of them knew it was not quite true. For a little while neither spoke, and the silence was the most companionable thing that had happened to her in a very long time. It was the Duke who broke it, and he did so by being of use. My sister believes she has ruined you, he said, turning the thing over so she could see its sides. Send you home and she wins. You go back to London a laughing matter, and she dines out upon it for a year. Now, shall I tell you how we overturn it? We, said Linnet. We. If you don't go back at all, if you stay engaged and paid and busy at honest work, then she has no story, only the awkward spectacle of the woman she meant to break, installed at Aldermere, and thriving. She has a reputation for cleverness she cannot afford to have questioned. You have nothing left to lose. It is an uneven match, and not in her favor. You are offering me a position, she said slowly. I am offering you a weapon, and myself one at the same time. So you need not thank me. There is a glass house at the end of the west wing, dark these 3 years, full of my mother's unfinished work, which I cannot look at, cannot sell, and cannot bring myself to burn. It wants cataloging, and restoring where the damp has got in, and where a study was left undone, it wants finishing, by someone who paints what is true. I will pay you a proper wage, and not my sister's insulting 20, and I will leave you alone in the light and the silence, which is the greatest luxury I own. In return, you make my mother's work whole, here, under my roof, where all the world can see you were not sent away. She will call me your mistress, Linnet said. It was not a protest, only the truth, laid down so he could not say later she had not warned him. Let her, he said, with a weariness that was almost peace. What is the good opinion of a world that watched your father praised and let him die cold? You will have work that matters, and a roof that does not leak, and light to paint by, and no one, permitted to make you stand. He held out his good left hand across the space between the chairs. Well, have I astonished you, or bored you? She thought of the Lady Sibylla waiting somewhere warm for news that the dauber had been thrown out. She thought of a glass house full of a dead woman's flowers, waiting under sheets to be looked at again. Astonished, Your Grace, she said, and put her hand into his, and shook it once, firmly, as her father had taught her, as an equal and not a servant. I believe your sister has made a serious error in her sums. They gave her a small, warm room at the end of the wing, and when she woke the next morning, she lay still a long while, trying to name the strange thing that had woken her, until she understood. It was quiet. No landlady's bell, no pupil's mother at the door, no one waiting for her to be less than she was. The glass house stopped her in the doorway. It was a cathedral of iron and glass gone green with neglect, and the pale northern light came down through the grimy panes across a wilderness of dust sheets, and beneath them, when she lifted them, was the life's work of a woman she would never meet. Studies by the hundred, roses and irises and auriculas, some finished and glorious, some the barest beginning with a note in a fine, impatient hand, finish this in the spring. The damp had foxed some of them, and her whole trade rose up in her at the sight, love and anger together. For here was true work left to rot, because the one man who owned it loved it too much to look. She heard his step and did not turn. She was better than they told you, Your Grace, she said, into the green light. They undersold her. I know it, said the Duke. He had come to see whether she would weep or gush or handle the sheets like a shop-girl. She did none of these. She found an apron on a peg, stiff with a dead woman's dried colors, put it on, and took up a foxed study of a striped tulip, and told him plainly what could be saved, and how, and what was lost. And he stood in the doorway, and listened to a stranger speak of his mother's work as work, a thing with a structure, and a future, and a set of solvable problems, and something in his shoulders eased that had not eased in years. She began that morning, and did not stop for many mornings. She rose with the light, because the light was the whole of her trade, and there was never enough of it. Osgood brought her bread and hot tea, and would not let her carry the tray. And most days, the Duke came at noon, and sat among the staging, and watched her work, and did not speak. And it was the least uncomfortable silence she had ever kept with a living soul. On the fourth day, Wolsey adopted her. A vast, ancient Tom, the color of marmalade left too long in the pot, who had belonged to the late Duchess, and spent the years since biting anyone who presumed upon him. Osgood, the doctor, and once, memorably, the Duke. That morning he crossed the glass house with the slow contempt of a magistrate, climbed into her lap, and slept, so that she could not move her painting hand for 2 hours, and did not try. When the Duke found them, so he was quiet a moment. "He bit me the year my mother died," he said, "as a man reports a grave betrayal. Either you have bewitched my cat, or he has better judgment than every physician in the North, and I do not know which alarms me more." "He is only warm," she said, not looking up. "And he knows I will not make him move for anyone. It is a great deal to know you will not be made to move." He did not answer for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It is." The true test came from a folio at the bottom of a stack, tied with a black ribbon gone soft as cloth. She opened it and stopped. Inside was the largest and finest study the Duchess had made, unfinished, a spray of 6 pale, drooping bells, the green-white of new wax on a tall stem, drawn entire and painted only upon 3 of the 6. In the corner, in that fine, impatient hand, she had written, "The snowdrop tree flowers, but once in 7 years. I shall be here to finish it." And she had not been. Linnet went and found the Duke. "There is a study of a Halesia," she said. "Your mother left it 3 bells short." She meant to finish it and did not. His face closed like a shutter. "I know the one. Leave it. Some things are not to be finished, Miss Farrow. Wrap it up again." "No," she said, and the word lay in the cold room. To leave it 3 bells short is not to honor her. It is to let the damp have it in 20 years, until no one knows she made it at all. That is not a monument. It is a slow burial. I can finish it. Not as she would have, I am no such painter, and I would never sign it. It is hers. But I can lay the last 3 bells exactly as her own hand began them, so the thing lives, so that 100 years from now, a stranger sees what your mother saw and never suspects the join. That is not a forgery. It is a rescue. She wrote that she would be here to finish it. Let me be here for her." He looked at the obstinate woman in his study, and something moved in his ruined face that was a kind of breaking, that was also a kind of mending. "Finish it," he said, very low, and then he turned to the fire, because there are things a proud man cannot say and be seen doing, and said, more low, "Thank you." It took her 9 days. On the 9th, she laid the last wash on the last bell and stepped back, and the Halesia stood entire, 6 flowers where there had been 3, and no living eye could have found the place where one woman's work ended and another's began. The Duke came and saw it and said nothing for the space of 100 heartbeats. Then he did a thing that frightened her more than anger. He took a clean sheet, sat, and with his good left hand began to write, slowly, badly, the letters coming crooked and effortful, and she understood that the gloved right hand was the hand that had once written and once, perhaps, drawn, and would never do either again. She did not remark upon his hand. "What you are writing?" she asked instead. "A letter," he said, forming each word with terrible care. To a man I knew before the war, who keeps rooms near Somerset House, and has the ear of the people who decide what the world may call art, and what it may call merely pretty. My mother could never be shown. It was not done, for a woman of her rank. That grief I cannot mend. He looked up, and his eyes rested on her, until she put a hand to the staging. But you are of no rank at all, Miss Farrow, and you have that freedom at least. I am sending him a folio of your own work, not my mother's. Yours, under your own name. He returned to his crooked letters. I have not asked your leave, and will not, because you would refuse me out of pride, and I have decided your pride may go hang. Some things are not to be left 3 bells short. She could not speak. Do not thank me, he said, sealing it clumsily. It is a small parcel and a long road, and it will very likely come to nothing. But it went out that afternoon on the carrier's cart, north to south, a flat brown parcel tied with string, and neither of them spoke of it again, and both of them thought of nothing else. Word travels, even to the edge of a moor, and fastest of all when it is unwelcome. The word that reached the Lady Sibylla Vane in the middle weeks of that winter was this, that the painter she had sent north to be broken was not broken, but installed at Cranmore, working in the old Duchess's glass house, dining, it was whispered, at the Duke's own table, and that her terrible brother, who received no one, had been heard to defend the creature. So, because a joke that curdles must be salted before it can be swallowed, she sent an emissary. He came on a hard, bright morning of black frost, in a coach too fine for the road, and did not knock so much as summon. Linnet heard it from the glass house, and felt the old dread stir, the dread that had lived in her through years of landladies and merchants' wives. And she set down her brush and went, because she had promised herself on the carrier's cart that she would never again hide, and a promise is a poor thing if it holds only in fair weather. The man on the step was perhaps 50, dressed with an expense that announced itself, and he came in already talking, in the fluting voice of a person who has never suspected he might be tiresome. "Aldermere," he called to the hall, "it is Prior, come to save you from yourself. Loftus Prior, arbiter of the beautiful, sent by your incomparable sister." He caught sight of Linnet, and looked her up and down through a raised glass, with the rudeness of a man pricing a heifer. "And you must be the celebrated painter, the little sensation of the North. Sibylla was quite right. You are exactly as advertised." Behind her a step sounded on the stone, and stopped, and the hall seemed to drop several degrees. "Prior," said the Duke from the corridor, "I do not recall opening my door to you." Mr. Loftus Prior turned, all smiles, and made a bow of insulting elegance, and demanded to see the work. And Linnet, who had decided she would not this time be made afraid, said he was welcome to it, and led him to the glass house herself, the Duke coming silent behind. Prior went along the staging with his glass raised, past the rescued roses and the finished Helicia, making small, approving hums, and she watched a foolish man look at a dead woman's genius and a living woman's labor, and find nothing in it that troubled his comfort by a hair. "Charming," he said at last, "competent even." He turned to her with a smile of enormous kindness, which is the cruelest smile there is. "You have a pretty hand and a truthful eye for a pedal, and in a kinder world you might have decorated fans for a very superior shop. That is not nothing. But let us be honest, it is flowers." He spread his soft white hands. "It is flowers, and it is nothing more, and no serious person alive, no gallery, no gentleman of taste, and most certainly no academy, will ever stand before a woman's watercolor of a rose and call it art. They will call it accomplishment, and be right to, for there is a wall between the two, and I did not build it, and you had the misfortune to be born on the wrong side of it. In his shaft of sun, Woolsey opened one orange eye, judged him, and closed it again. And here, Pryor went on, warming to his own benevolence, is where I may be of service, for Sibylla did not send me only to look. I keep a workshop in town. There is always call for a neat hand to copy plates and color engravings. Honest, steady piecework. Respectable. Paid by the week. Come to London under my roof and be useful and safe, and give over these pretensions to something you were never meant to have. It is the kindest thing anyone will ever offer you, and it was, in its way, the whole of her old life held out on a soft white hand, every landlady and every invisible year, dressed up now in the word safe, and she understood that if she took it, she would be warm and fed and finished forever. "No," said Linnet Farrow. Pryor blinked. "I beg your pardon." I said no, and I thank you for the offer, which was meant to be generous. So I will be generous and tell you plainly why I refuse it. She was quite calm, and the calm astonished even her. I am not a neat hand for copying other men's plates. I am a painter. My father was a painter, better than his day deserved, and he died poor because men like you were too comfortable to look at him twice. I have painted what is true since I was a child, and I will go on whether your wall stands or falls, and I would sooner do it hungry and unfashionable at the edge of the world than do your safe piecework in a warm room with my name rubbed off it. You came a long way to tell me what I am. You have it wrong. That is all." Even the rooks had stopped. Pryor's kind smile curdled, and he turned to the Duke, expecting the master of the house to correct such insolence. But the Duke was watching Linnet, and his eyes had in them for the first time something dangerously alive. "Osgood," he said, without turning his head, "Mr. Pryor is cold. Bring his coach round, and tell my sister I inspected her arbiter of the beautiful with great care, and find him competent. Charming, even." He let the words rest where Pryor had laid his own. But nothing more. "You looked at 40 years of the finest botanical work in the North, sir, and saw fans and shop signs. A man's eye is the one thing he cannot lie about, and yours has told me all I need. I would not trust it to price a turnip. Good day." Mr. Loftus Pryor left a great deal faster than he arrived, and Osgood shut the door upon him with private satisfaction. Linnet stood among the flowers with her heart going hard. She had walked straight through the old dread, and on the far side of it had said aloud the true name of what she was, and the world had not ended. She had also just closed the last safe door behind her. There was no copying work in town now, no small, invisible living to crawl back to. Her hands shook, and she hid them in her apron. Too late. "He is a fool," said the Duke. "He is," she agreed. "And my whole future rested one moment on the offer of a fool, and I threw it in the fire. Tell me there was sense in it somewhere." He crossed to her and stopped close, and did not touch her, and offered no soft word, because he owned none, and she would not have believed them. "There was no sense in it at all," he said. "It was the least sensible thing I have ever watched a person do." The hard mouth did something that, on any other face, would have been tenderness. It was also the truest. Do not ever let a man in an expensive coat tell you which side of his wall you belong on. The wall is his. You are not obliged to live inside his arithmetic. She made a discovery a fortnight later that she was not looking for. The cataloging had spread into the shrouded rooms, and she went one afternoon into a small, cold study after a portfolio, and found on a high shelf, wrapped in oilcloth, a book that was not the Duchess's. It was a sketchbook worn soft at the corners, and the hand in it was not the fine, impatient hand of the dead woman, but a bolder, quicker, younger hand, sure of itself, in love with itself a little, as the gifted young are. Horses. the men of a regiment in a dozen swift, true lines, foreign mountains under a hard light, the laughing woman from the portrait, drawn with a tenderness that closed her throat, and beneath her, the single word, Mother. And every drawing had been made by a right hand. She knew it the way she knew anything of her trade, by the fall of the lines. A right hand that would never make anything again. "Put it down," said the Duke from the doorway. His ruined hand was curled at his side, and his face was terrible. Not with anger, but with the defenselessness of a man surprised in the presence of the thing he cannot bear. "I did not mean to pry," she said, and did not put it down. "This is very fine," she said quietly. "Better than fine. You were going to be a painter." "I was going to be nothing," he said, "flat and dead. I was a boy who drew. Then there was a war, and a French saber had a differing opinion of my hand, and I came home and could not sign my own name, let alone this." He looked at the book, the way a starving man looks through a window at a table. "I keep it there, so I need never see it, and cannot make myself burn it. My mother's flowers under their sheets, my own hands in a book on a shelf. I have built a house of things I loved too well to look at. And then you came, with your dying dog Rose, and began pulling the sheets off one by one, and I have not had a quiet hour since." She set the book down open at a blank page, found a stub of black chalk in a silver holder, and held it out. "Show me," she said. "Do not," he said. "I am not offering you pity. Pity is useless, and I have never had any to spare. I am offering you a problem, and problems are the only thing I was ever any good at." She kept her hand out. "You held a brush once. The wrist is unhurt. I see it in how you hold yourself. It is only the two last fingers that will not close, and a hand does not need its last two fingers to make a mark. It needs a grip and a brace and a great deal of stubbornness, and you have never been short of the last of those. You will be bad at it. You will want to throw the chalk across the room, and you may, and then you will pick it up and try again, because that is the whole secret no one ever tells you. It was never the hand. It was picking the chalk up again." For a long moment he did not move. Then, slowly, he peeled the black glove from his right hand. She did not flinch and did not stare. She looked at the ruined hand truly, the scarring, the two fingers drawn in and fixed, and then looked away to the chalk, because it was only a tool, and a tool is not a tragedy, and she would not let him make it one in front of her. She took the hand in both of hers, the first time she had touched him, and felt his breath catch, and folded his good fingers and thumb around the holder, and braced it against the curl of the ruined too, and felt him go very still, the whole large, frightened stillness of him, under her steady hands. "There," she said softly. "Now it is only light and a great deal of practice. My father used to say, 'A mark is a mark, and the world cannot tell whether you made it easily. Make a mark, Everard.'" She had not meant to use his name. It came out of her the way truth did when she was not guarding it, and it hung in the cold air, and he looked from his braced, trembling hand up into her face, and said, very low and not steadily at all, "Linnet." And then, with the whole of his ruined, stubborn hand, he made a mark, a single crooked wavering line, the sort a small child makes, and it cost him more than most men spend in a year, and when it was done, he let out a breath he seemed to have held since Spain. Neither of them let go of the other's hand, for rather longer than the making of one crooked line could possibly require. After that, the days changed their color, though the almanac said only that the year was turning back toward the light. They did not speak of what had happened, being neither of them people who trusted a thing by naming it, but the sheets came off the pictures now, room by room, until the shrouded gallery had begun to open its eyes, And every afternoon, the Duke sat at the long table and swore at his crooked marks and picked the chalk up again, because a woman had told him that was the whole secret, and he had decided, against his long practice of despair, to believe her. Mrs. Dunmore, the housekeeper, began to speak of spring as a woman planning a resurrection, and no one in all that warming house was permitted to be cold. Lynette did not let herself think of the parcel gone south, or of Pryor's soft voice coming back in the night. No serious person alive, no academy, for she had learned that a fool's cruelty lodges deeper than a wise man's, costing the fool nothing to say, and the hearer everything to disprove. So she did not hope. She very nearly managed it. It was on a bright, hard morning near the end of the frost, with the first thin gold of a stronger sun along the moor, that the sound came up the drive. Not the light rattle of the carrier, not the single coach of a solitary connoisseur, the heavy grinding of many wheels and the ring of many hooves on the frozen gravel, the sound of consequence arriving in force. Osgood appeared in the doorway, his long gray face emptied of its new lightness, a man bracing for the next blow. "Miss Farrow," he said. And then, as the great iron knocker began to fall, and fall, in a hand that expected the house to leap, "It is her ladyship. It is the Lady Sibylla, and she has not come alone." The Lady Sibylla Vane came into her brother's house the way hard weather comes, without knocking twice, and without waiting to be asked. She swept past Osgood before the door was full open, her party rustling behind her in costly cloth and cold air, and stopped halfway across the marble to stare at a hall she plainly did not know, for the shutters were open. The tall windows that had been blind for years let in the hard, bright morning, and it fell on swept floors and on the pictures, which were no longer veiled, a laughing face here and a vase of red roses there, so that the house which had shut its own eyes for so long had opened them, and it was looking back at her. Lynette had come up at the sound and stood at the mouth of the corridor in her apron, and she watched the Lady Sibylla understand the change in the house, and saw a thing there she filed away. It was not surprise. It was nearer to fear. Sibylla was beautiful, as the legend promised, with her brother's pale gray eyes. But where the portrait above the study fire gave the mother a mouth made for laughing, the daughter had a mouth that turned down slightly at the corners, as though the whole world were a dish sent back to the kitchen. She had dressed for triumph and brought an audience for it. 2 fashionable women, a languid young man, and wrapped against the frost and already smiling, Mr. Loftus Pryor. He had come back. Of course he had. A man does not forgive being told his eye could not price a turnip. "Well," said the Lady Sibylla, in a voice pitched for the people behind her, "it is worse than Pryor told me. Someone has been very busy, pulling the sheets off my mother's things, airing the house, playing at being its mistress." Her pale eyes came to rest on Lynette, the way one reads a bill one doesn't mean to pay. And here she is, the busy little person herself. The Duke of Aldermere came out of the corridor into the light of his own hall. He did not shuffle. He came upright, his dark head high, a man some weeks now in the habit of rising and dressing and being of use, and the change in him was greater than all the open shutters together. When last his sister saw him, he had been a ruin she could visit and manage and sigh over. He was not a ruin now. "Sibylla," he said, "you have brought guests to a house that receives no one. How very like you." "The house received me well enough once," she said, and for half a breath the edge slipped, and beneath it was something old and raw. "Before you shut it, and shut yourself in it, and left me to answer in every drawing room for the vain who could not be seen. You do not know what it costs to be the whole of a family, in the world's eye, while the head of it hides upon a moor. I built us a standing out of my own 2 hands and my own hard face, while you grew a beard in the dark, and now I hear you have found the strength after all, not to do your duty, but to install a drawing mistress in our mother's glass house, and let the world call her what it pleases. So that is the wound, thought Linnet, standing still. It was never the flowers, it was the light. Sibylla had been the living vein, the competent one, and her whole consequence was built upon her brother's darkness, and here was the darkness lifting. I did not come to quarrel in a hallway, the Lady Sibylla went on, bright again, cruel again, for cruelty was the ground she stood surest upon. I came to see the famous paintings. Bring them out, girl. Let us all have a look at what has undone the House of Aldermere. You need fetch nothing, said the Duke, frost in his voice now. Sibylla, you will take your friends and your arbiter of turnips and go. Not until I have done the one kindness I came to do, she said sweetly, and save you a very great embarrassment before it is printed in every scandal sheet from here to Bath. She turned to her audience and raised her voice and delivered the thing she had driven through the frost to say, before witnesses who would carry it home. Look at her, her apron, her hands, her 4 gowns turned into one. She is a drawing mistress, a person who colors pictures for shopkeepers' daughters, and my lonely brother has let her fill his head with the notion that she is an artist. But we are none of us fooled. We know precisely what she is worth. She paints flowers. The word hung in the bright, cold air. Nothing more, said the Lady Sibylla, and smiled. You need not take my word, she added, warming to it. We have the finest eye in England with us. Prior, tell my besotted brother, before witnesses, what his little painter is truly worth. Mr. Prior stepped into the middle of the hall and clasped his soft hands and turned on his heel with the grave, kindly look of a man about to do a hard duty gently. He lifted his glass to the red roses. Charming, he pronounced. He turned it on the Halesia at the head of the stairs. Competent. More than competent. There is even a kind of feeling in it, and that is precisely the trouble, for feeling is not thought, and a pretty accuracy is not genius. It is decoration. It is women's work, and I say so without unkindness. But no gallery will hang it, and no serious hand will ever sign a paper calling it art, and most certainly no academy in the kingdom will ever trouble itself over a drawing mistress and her flowers. I would stake my whole reputation upon it. The 2 women laughed behind their gloves. The languid young man smiled, and the thing was done, cleanly and publicly, by an authority they all agreed to trust. The Duke took a step forward, his eyes gone to silver, and Linnet knew he was about to throw the whole party into the frost and let them make of it whatever story they liked. Do not, said his sister, very softly, so only he and Linnet heard, and there was triumph in it, for she had foreseen this too. If you rage, you are the madman of the moor defending his kept woman, and it is in every paper by Friday, and it is her name that suffers most, not yours. There is one thing only that ends this quietly, and you know it. Send the girl below stairs where she belongs. Disown the connection now, and I will forget I ever saw those shutters open. It is the only kindness left to do her. For a moment the whole hall waited on him, and Linnet saw the trap in all its cleverness, for every road led downward. If he raged, she was ruined loudly. If he disowned her, she was ruined quietly. There was no answer in the room that did not end with her in the dark. She stays, said the Duke of Aldermere, and she is not mine to disown, Sibylla, because she was never mine to own. She is her own, entirely, which is a thing you have never once understood. It was the truest thing he could have said, and the worst, for it fed the story exactly as she had known it would, and the women exchanged a heavy glance, and Pryor smiled into his collar. Sibylla had lost the argument and won the field, and everyone knew it, and Lynette stood on the wrong side of Pryor's wall and felt the old cold close over her head. For truth on paper cannot cross the gap between accomplishment and art when the men who guard the gate have agreed to keep it shut. A hush came down, the particular hush after a verdict, when there is nothing left but the leaving. And it was into that hush, as though the house had waited for its cue, that Osgood came through with the morning's post upon a salver. He crossed the whole bright length of the hall and stopped before Lynette, the painter in the apron, and inclined his head, and presented it to her as though she were the only person of consequence in the room. Upon it lay one letter, thick and heavy, the paper good, closed with a great deal of red wax, stamped with a seal that Lynette did not know, but that made Mr. Pryor go very slightly still. And it was addressed in a clear official hand, not to the Duke and not to the Lady Sibylla, but to Miss Lynette Farrow at Cranmore Hall. The Lady Sibylla looked at the letter carried past her to a nobody, and the affront of it kindled in her face, and because she could not bear a scene she was not directing, she stepped forward and plucked it from the salver before Lynette's fingers could close on it. "What is this?" she said, reading the direction aloud with scorn. "A love note. A dun. A bill from the color man." She held it up between two fingers for her audience. "We are all friends here. Let us have no secrets." "Shall I read it out?" No one answered her, and the Lady Sibylla had never required an answer to do as she pleased. She broke the red wax and unfolded the good thick paper and began to read aloud in the bright, mocking voice of a woman certain she is about to land the final blow. "Madam," she read, and paused to smile at the word, "it is the pleasant duty of the undersigned, on behalf of the council." She stopped. The smile stayed on her mouth a moment after it had left her eyes. "On behalf of the Council of the Royal Academy of Arts," she read, more slowly, at Somerset House. Something turned in the hall then, the way a tide turns while one stands in the shallows, a change in the pull of the water the eye cannot yet see. She read on because the paper had her and would not let her go. "It is our judgment, arrived at with a unanimity we seldom enjoy, that the works are of a truth and a merit rarely met with in this or any season." Her voice had begun to thin. "We are accustomed to think the study of flowers a minor and decorative art. These studies have obliged us to think again. Here is the living structure of a thing, and the honest fact of its dying set down together with a tenderness that shames a great deal of what will hang upon our walls this year. And the small study of the common dog rose in particular has been passed from hand to hand among us with an admiration I will not embarrass you by reporting." The Lady Sibylla's voice simply stopped, as a clock stops, and she stood with the paper trembling in her beautiful hand, and did not read the rest. So Lynette crossed the marble in her apron and took the letter gently from fingers that did not resist her, and finished it herself, in a voice low and steady that carried into every corner. "We should be honored if you would permit us to hang the whole of the folio in the public exhibition of this year, under your own name, Miss Farrow, an invitation this council has not extended lightly to any woman these many years." She turned the page. It was signed by a distinguished gentleman of the Academy, and beneath his name he had added a private line, plainly not meant for a crowded hall, and Lynette read it anyway, because the crowded hall had earned it. "Tell Aldermere that he was right to send them, and righter still to say nothing of whose eye first knew their worth. The credit is the lady's and the lady's alone. The silence after that was of a wholly different order than the silence before it. Mr. Loftus Pryor had gone the color of tallow. Not a quarter-hour since he had staked his whole reputation that no academy would ever trouble itself over this painter, and the highest body of art in the land had, in the same room and before the same witnesses, begged the honor of hanging her. The two fashionable women were no longer smiling. They were looking at Pryor and at the Lady Sibylla, with the swift, cold reappraisal of people who have grasped which way a story will be told and mean to be on the right side of the telling. For it would be told, exactly as Sibylla had arranged, only with every part reversed. Not the painter put in her place, but the great lady and her famous eye, who had driven through the frost to sneer at a woman the Royal Academy chose that same morning to honor, and staked a reputation upon it, and lost. Pryor made one attempt to save himself. "The council grows sentimental in its age," he said, and the laugh came out cracked. "A passing fashion for the untutored hand. It will not last a season." But no one was listening any longer, and he heard it, and the rest died behind his teeth. Lynette looked at him and found she had no anger left to spend, only a distant pity, and he seemed to feel the pity land, for it made him flinch as no fury could have, and he stepped back and was not important anymore. The Lady Sibylla, robbed of her audience and her expert both, turned on the nearest living creature, which was Lynette. "And what you imagine this changes," she said, low and vicious, every silver ornament gone, and only the blade left. "A pretty letter got up for you by my brother, who spent his name and his rank to buy you an hour's attention you could never have won alone. You have climbed nothing." A duke reached down and lifted a nobody over the wall because she painted his dead mother's flowers and made a ruined man feel young, and all London will understand exactly that within the week. His name opened that door. Not your little roses. Take the name away, and you are what you were on the cart, a hungry girl with stained hands and nowhere to sleep. It was cruel and clever, and worst of all, it was the very thing that had risen in Lynette's own chest a moment before, and to hear it in another woman's mouth was to feel it barbed and driven home. She was quiet a moment. She thought of her father dying in a cold room while finer men kept warm, and of every drawing room that had taught her to fold herself smaller, and found she wasn't small this morning and didn't mean to be again. "Perhaps his name opened the door," she said, and her voice did not shake. "I will not pretend it did not, for I don't yet know the whole of it, and I have never learned to lie to feel braver. Perhaps a great man carried my work to a place I could not have reached alone, and perhaps that is not fair, and a great many things are not fair, as your ladyship, who has never carried her own portfolio through the rain, cannot be expected to know. But hear the rest, for you will not give me another hearing. A door may be opened by anyone with a name or a key or a friend. What is found on the far side of it cannot be opened for a person by anyone at all. Your brother carried my pages to Somerset House, and I thank him with my whole heart, and I will thank him properly when there are fewer people about. But he did not paint the dog rose. He cannot hold a brush, and has told me so with his own mouth. Those men passed my pages from hand to hand because of what was set down on them, and what was set down is mine, and no name on earth put it there. Call me a hungry girl with stained hands until your voice gives out. It is quite true. And I painted a thing that moved the finest eyes in England, and both are true in the same breath, and there is not one word you can say that makes either the smaller." The Lady Sibylla had no answer. For the first time that morning, perhaps in a great many years, she had none at all, and the silence where it should have been was louder than any sneer. The Duke had not moved through any of it. When at last he spoke, his voice was quiet and almost gentle, which was the most terrible thing of all. You came to remind the world what a flower painter is worth, he said. You have succeeded beyond anything you hoped. For 3 winters, you told them all I was lost, and you were not wrong. But you found you liked me lost, and when the darkness began to lift, you did not come to help me up. You came to push me back down, and brought an audience to watch. That is the whole of you, and I have been too tired for 3 years to see it. I am not tired now. He inclined his head toward the door with a courtesy colder than any blow. My house is done receiving you. Osgood will bring your coach. There was nothing left for her to stand upon. She looked once about the bright hall, the open shutters, the roses in the clean light, and Linnet saw her understand, fully and manully, that she had carried the instrument of her own defeat the whole way through the frost in her own hand, and unfolded it, and read it aloud. Then she gathered the ruins of her composure, lifted her chin in a way Linnet could not help but recognize, and went, and her silenced party rustled out behind her, and Mr. Loftus Pryor went last, and looked at no one. Osgood shut the great door, and then the hall was empty, and enormously quiet and full of light, and Linnet stood in the middle of it with the letter in her 2 hands, shaking again, and this time she did not entirely know why. She had won. The words were on the paper, and no one could unsay them. It was more than her father had been given in the whole of his life, and it had come in a single morning. She should have been on her knees with the joy of it. And yet, tell Aldermere that he was right to send them. Her whole vindication had passed, first through a duke's hand and a duke's old friendship, and she did not know, standing in the light with everything she had ever wanted, trembling in her fingers, whether she had crossed the wall at last, or whether a great man had simply reached down and lifted her over it. "Linnet," said the Duke very quietly, but she could not look at him just then, could not have borne the kindness in his face on top of everything else, and so she pressed the letter to her chest and turned and walked away from him down the bright passage. Alone, to be alone, with the largest morning of her life gone strange and complicated in her hands. She did not hear him follow, but she was not surprised, when she had stood a while among the green light with the letter pressed to her chest, to hear his step come to rest in the doorway of the glass house behind her. He did not come in. He gave her the room, as he had from the first, and when she did not turn, he spoke to her back, into all that light. "You are thinking that I bought it for you," he said. She said nothing, which was an answer. "Then let me say it plainly, and you may do with it what you like. I carried your pages to a door. I will not pretend my name counted for nothing, for it counted for the opening, and the opening only. But a name gets a folio untied. It doesn't keep it from being sent home with a cool line of thanks. Half the great houses in England could have got those pages looked at by tea time and had them back by supper. What a name cannot do, Linnet, not mine, not the king's, is make the finest eyes in this country fall silent and pass a small page from hand to hand, and be ashamed to say aloud how much it moved them. There is no coin for that. It happened because of what was on the paper, and what was on the paper was yours. I did not lift you over the wall. I have no such power. No one has. I only refuse to stand in a warm room and watch you die unlooked at, the way your father died, while the fashionable kept their fires banked. That much a duke is good for. Opening a door, and refusing to let the wall be the end of the road. Why you not told me, she said, turning at last. Because you would have refused me, out of the same pride that threw a fool's charity into the fire not a fortnight past, and I was not willing to let your pride cost you the one thing your whole life had been spent earning. Be as angry as you please. I would do it again tomorrow. It is not anger, she said, and it came out unsteady. It is that I don't know how to hold this. I know how to be hungry. I know how to be turned out and to find the next cold room and begin again. What I don't know is how to be wanted, and to let myself believe it will not be taken back the moment I am foolish enough to want it too. That is the one thing no one thought to teach a girl with paint under her nails, and I am more afraid of it than I have ever been of the cold. For the cold, I know how to survive. For the first time, she saw the Duke of Aldermere cross a room quickly. He came and stood before her, closer than he had ever stood, and did not touch her, because he was not a man who took what he had not been given. You believe this began as a weapon, he said. Lo, it did. I told you so the first night, and I meant it, and I was lying to us both. You came in out of the frost with a dying flower and told me the truth of it, and you have not stopped telling me the truth since, when not another soul in my life has dared. And you pulled the sheets off this house one by one, and did not have the decency to stop at the pictures. You uncovered me as well. I have not had a quiet hour since you came, and I find I do not want one ever again. I want the noise of you in it. I want the chalk thrown across the room and picked up again. He lifted his ruined right hand, the hand no one in his house was permitted to remark upon, and held it open between them, unhidden in the light. Stay, he said, not as my painter, not for any wage. Stay because I am asking you very badly to, and because I have not asked anyone for anything in a great many years, and have quite lost the trick of it. Lynette looked at the open, ruined hand held out to her in the light, and she did what she had done on the day of the chalk. She took it in both of hers, and did not flinch from it, and did not pity it, and lifted it, and pressed her mouth to the scarred back of it once, and felt him go very still. Everard, she said. Lynette, he answered, not steadily at all. And then there was no careful distance left between them, and the letter from the Royal Academy slipped forgotten to the staging among the roses, and the first kiss of the Duke of Aldermere, and the woman who would not be made small, was neither elegant nor practiced, for they were each of them long out of the habit of being wanted, and it was, without any question, the truest thing that had ever happened to either of them. Wolsey watched from his shaft of sun with the flat contempt of the ancient, forgave them nothing, and stayed. When at last she took the letter up again and smoothed it, she found the splinter had worked all the way out of the joy, and what was left was only the joy, clean and enormous, and hers, and his. She folded it into the pocket over her heart, where once there had been nothing but 2 small coins and a snare dressed as a favor, and went back to her work, because the light was good, and there was never enough of it, and now there was a whole life in which to chase it. They were married in the spring, in the small gray church at the edge of the moor, with Osgood standing very straight, and Mrs. Dunmore weeping frankly into a good handkerchief, and the rooks objecting from the yews, and the Duke put the ring upon a hand still faintly stained at the tips with a blue that would never wash out, and did not seem to mind it in the least. As for the Lady Sibylla, the season did with her very nearly what she had meant to do to Lynette, for the drawing rooms she had once ruled found a new tale to pass round that winter, and it was not a kind one, and it did not end with a painter in an apron. She did not call at Cranmore again. Everard sent word once, through Osgood, that his door would open to a sister who came to help a person up, rather than push one down, and he did not say it unkindly, and did not hear back, and after a time, he stopped watching the drive. Some walls, Lynette came to see, a person raises against her own self, and no letter from any academy on earth can pull the sheets from those. Her studies hung that season at Somerset House, under her own name, in a room where the light was good, and a great many people who had been quite sure that the painting of flowers was a small and womanish thing came away less sure than they went in. She stood near her little dog Rose on the opening day, unknown to anyone, and watched a plain older gentleman stop before the dying petal with the brown left honestly at its edge, and look a long while and press a handkerchief once to his eyes, thinking himself unobserved, and move on, never knowing the woman who made it stood at his elbow. She did not speak to him. She only understood, more surely than any counsel could have told her, what her father had meant in the cold room at the end. A true thing finds the one person in a crowded gallery who needs it, and goes straight into him, and never once asks whether he approves of the painting of flowers. In a quiet room adjoining, by an arrangement she made herself and would not be argued out of, hung a second folio, roses and a whole drowned garden brought up at last into the light, and the small card beside them gave the name of a lady long dead who had painted every flower in her husband's glass house, for the love of it, and died before she was ever once permitted to be seen. The Duke stood a long while before that wall, with his wife's hand in his ruined one, and said nothing, because he did not need to. His hand learned to make its marks. It never made them easily, and never made them well, and he swore at it to the end of his days, and threw the chalk across a good many rooms. But he made them. In the mornings, when the light came clean and gold across the moor instead of gray and failing, the two of them worked side by side at the long table, her true flowers and his crooked, stubborn lines, and Wolsey grew older and fatter and outlived every prediction, and the house was never, in any season, permitted to be cold. The world had been so very sure. That was the thing she thought of, sometimes, standing in the good light with a brush in her hand. So certain that a flower was a small thing, a pretty nothing, worth a sneer and no more. But she had learned in a cold room long ago the one thing the sneering world never troubles to learn. A true thing, held up to the light, lets the light straight through. It does not matter whose hand holds it, or how grand, or how mean. The light finds what is honest in a thing, and passes clean through, and goes on shining out the other side, long after every clever voice that called it nothing has gone quiet and been forgotten, and that, in the end, is worth rather more than a flower. It is the whole reason to keep painting what is true. If this story stayed with you, if you found yourself hoping for a woman the world had agreed to overlook, then do please leave a like, for it truly helps these stories find the people who need them. Subscribe if you would like to sit by the fire with us again, for there is always another tale waiting, of quiet people who refuse to be made small. And tell me below, was the Duke right to send her folio without a word, or should he have trusted her to choose for herself? I read every one, and I should love to know what you think. Thank you, with all my heart, for listening to the very end.